This is an interview series we call The Trade-Off, where we wrestle with all kinds of financial decisions. We typically talk about stuff like investing and cash flow and debt management, real estate, stuff like that. Today's topic is something really different from that. When I was getting ready for the election, I started to think about how much these local political election decisions actually impact personal finances, whether it's property tax increases and how those might be allocated. What can I build on my property? How are the schools being handled in the COVID crisis? There's all sorts of personal financial implications of these local political decisions. So I thought it would be fun to delve into it a little bit and get more educated about it. So we're going to talk about local politics today and how better understanding local politics can put you in a position to build the community that you want to live in, which will affect you and your family. And today we're joined by Jack Craver. He is the creator and author of the Austin Politics newsletter. Thanks for doing this, Jack.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. So one of the reasons I think this is a really fun topic is because people have seemingly never been more interested in at least national politics, given the voter turnout being as massive as it was. So that brought people out to the polls. And on down the list of things to vote for is a bunch of local issues that most people just aren't that familiar with, myself included, really. So I was hoping to get a chance to kind of ask you some questions to get us more familiar with those issues and how to help think about them. But could you start by giving us some background on what you're doing with your newsletter and the nature of that work?
Totally. So I started the Austin Politics newsletter almost 2 years ago. It was the end of January 2019, and I'd been I'd been working freelance as a reporter for a variety of publications for the last couple of years since I'd moved to Austin in 2015, and I just decided to go out on my own and start this subscription-based newsletter. And based on a lot of the knowledge that I'd gathered covering City Hall for the Austin Monitor, and it's focused entirely on city government as well as some other local government, but almost entirely city government, especially land use and transportation, which are the two biggest issues I think shaping city politics and really the future of the city of Austin and how it grows, right? The politics of growth. And it's been a great ride so far. I have a nice little subscriber base that I've built up, and it's sustainable. It's everybody pays the same amount. I don't take any donations or advertisements. It's all based on subscriptions, and it comes out every weekday in the morning. I try to get it out as early as possible, but it's tough. I'm a late riser, and that's there it is.
So I don't watch the local news, haven't in years. I don't read the local papers. Um, I almost all the information I get is non-local. I'm curious, like, how does the nature of your work and how you gather information, how does that differ maybe from those traditional local news sources?
Well, a lot of it's the same. I'm try as much as possible to do original reporting based on what's going on at city council, looking at government documents, going to city meetings, talking to city officials and activists. I'm essentially doing the same thing that the reporters at the Austin American Statesman and other outlets are doing. My product is slightly different though, because I mean, just the tone is different. It's a little more informal, and I inject a lot of my opinion and analysis. I mix that in with the reporting, so it's a mix of reporting and analysis and opinion commentary that traditional reporters should typically aren't authorized to provide.
Gotcha. Well, can we get into some of the topics?
Yeah, let's do it.
Uh, Prop A and Prop B. So I'm embarrassed to say that going into the week of election, I was so uninformed about this. I saw the signs up. I knew it was something big. I just, I put it off. And then I was scrambling for information. And I was disappointed that I couldn't really find the type of analysis that I was looking for to make a determination. I talked to a lot of people who were struggling as well. Some people were doing like simple personal utility calculations, like over the next 10 years, I'm going to pay this much in property tax and I might ride this train 4 or 5 times. And that sounds like a bad deal for me.
Sure.
Stuff like that. And I understand what they're trying to do. I think it's a short-sighted approach, but how could you help us either like how can you help us think about these big projects and in terms of like, is it a good deal? Is it a bad deal? How can people kind of wrap their heads around this stuff?
Well, the first and most important step is to present people the facts, which they're often not getting because political issues are shaped by propaganda, of course. And so Prop A, for instance, was subject to a very intense campaign, both from advocates and opponents. And it's hard to understand, to be informed on an issue if your only source of information are the proponents and opponents, right? Are the campaigns themselves. So, understanding how much Prop A costs and what does that mean to you as a taxpayer. A lot of people went to the polls thinking that Prop A would raise their property taxes by 25%. That's not true. It'll raise their property taxes by about 4%. It'll increase their city property taxes by 25%. And the people making the claim often did say that. So technically their claim was accurate. They say it's going to increase your city property taxes by 25%. Technically that's accurate, but we all know that so many people who heard that, what they're thinking is, oh, my property tax bill is going to increase by 25%, right? So, and of course, right, what that means depends on the value of your home. I forget, I think it was like, I was trying to look up a number here, what it means for the median value home. I've already forgotten. So, yeah, if you, it'd be like $339 a year if your home is worth $415,000, which is the average home value in the county. Now, in terms of whether it's good policy, that is, I was a big supporter of it, and I have a number of arguments in its favor that I presented to my readers, some of whom continue to disagree with me, nevertheless. I mean, that's a really complicated. That's a tough question, Kevin. How do I try to present people the facts and explain to them that even if you personally don't see yourself using this train, it is good for the community. It is good policy. I could talk all day about why I think it's good policy. It just depends how much time you have.
I'm curious, during the process of putting this proposal together, is there a third party that does some sort of supposedly objective analysis on the impacts, financial impacts, other types of impacts that is available to the public?
Well, I think city government typically, there were certainly government analyses that accompanied the Prop A. The city, every time the city puts a measure like that on the ballot, it was obligated to publish actually in the Austin American Statesman the tax impact. Of course, it's very confusing for people. I mean, just the way the information is presented. And when you went and voted on it yourself, you probably saw this huge, the language is incomprehensible and unintelligible right to the average person. But the city staff is I think they do a good job of presenting accurate information on that. They were pretty transparent about what the tax impact will be, how much it'll cost the average homeowner. And, I think the media, to varying degrees of success, communicated that to the public.
That's the cost element. I'm also wondering about the benefit element. There's an environmental
Mm-hmm.
impact. Is there some publicly available analysis of that? Some mobility benefit to help bring people to jobs who wouldn't otherwise be able to get to those jobs. Things like that.
Well, Cap Metro itself made projections about the number of riders that these routes will carry, by 2040, for instance. And of course, those are projections. It's really tough, and those projections depend on a variety of factors, right? Um, for instance, another big thing that I'm focused on is housing policy and our land development code. Are we going to allow housing to be built along these transit lines? Are we going to allow a density of housing and employment along these transit lines? And whether we do that has a lot to do with how productive that route will be, meaning how many riders it will get, how many cars it will be taking off the road, how heavily the route will have to be subsidized. Because the more riders you have, the more fare, right? The more fare recovery you're getting, and the less the general taxpayer has to subsidize the cost of the transit.
Speaking of development and housing, we have obviously a huge influx of people going on right now. There's really no end in sight to that. What is the current posture of the city towards development and building within Austin? I mean, obviously, Hutto and surrounding areas are building, but Austin seems very limited in its capacity to build currently. So I'm curious, what's the current posture? If we just kind of project that forward, what does that look like? And then what are the most politically viable alternatives to create more development, do you think?
So the city of Austin has a severe housing shortage, and it's not doing nearly enough to address it. Um, the city council is currently gridlocked over this issue. There's a solid majority, about 7 of the 11 city council members, including the mayor, support putting in place a new land development code that would provide some reform to increase housing stock, right? Basically, overhauling zoning regulations to allow more housing, right? So, building taller and bigger buildings on the corridors, as well as allowing more multi-unit housing in neighborhoods that are currently zoned for single-family homes. These reforms that were proposed in the land development code, the new land development code, are pretty modest, frankly. But again, it would marginally increase the city's housing capacity and hopefully allow us to become a denser city. It would relieve some of the pressure on the housing market. I mean, right now it's just a supply and demand issue, right? I mean, we just don't have the supply to meet this really, really high demand, which pushes housing prices higher and which puts a lot of pressure on low income people to leave the city in search of lower cost housing in places like Hutto and Manor and Elgin. Um, anyway, the city council has the votes to pass the land development code, but they were sued by some activists who claimed that they didn't have the right to basically do this zoning overhaul without a super majority. It's I don't really need we don't need to get into the details of state law, but long story short, basically a county judge agreed, a district judge agreed that city council needs 9 votes to overcome the objections of property owners who don't want their properties rezoned. And currently the city is appealing that decision. We'll see what happens, but right now city council is gridlocked and on this issue. And in my view, it's a big problem because we desperately need new land regulations to facilitate more housing and more sort of compact, connected development we're very much locked in this sort of 1980s era um, land use patterns that are focused entirely on, automobile use, really. It's about building single family subdivisions and building tons of parking because everybody's driving everywhere. And that's just the assumption that's built into how we develop land in Austin. And really to be a sustainable city, to grow in a way that is equitable and environmentally friendly and just I think better in every way. We need to change things and allow more types of housing that accommodates people of different income levels in all parts of the city. And to be clear, people who believe like I do are often labeled new urbanists. That's the term. But I think of myself as an old urbanist in that I want to go back to some of the great stuff that we used to do before this post World War II car obsession overtook our land use regulations. If you go to some of our oldest, most charming neighborhoods, Hyde Park, Clarksville, you see all kinds of different housing. You see tiny little houses on little lots. You see little apartment buildings. You see garage apartments. You see all kinds of stuff. And I don't think anybody would argue that those neighborhoods lack character, which is often the argument made against any change in this city. It's going to destroy the character. We only want single family homes. No, Anyway, so and just a quick note, Hyde Park. If you look at the street grid in Hyde Park, it's so different. Down in South Austin where I live, the street grid is just an absolute disaster. It's these winding
Right.
roads and cul-de-sacs and everything, and that's because everything was everyone's going to live in a single family home and everyone's going to drive everywhere. So we don't need to build these efficient roadways. If you look at Hyde Park, it's this perfect, beautiful little street grid, and that's because it was built in the late 19th century for streetcars. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here.
That's very interesting. I'm very familiar with that part of town, so I can picture everything you're saying. I'm curious, just help us out for somebody who is just becoming interested in this. Like, for example, I'm in Allendale, little neighborhood north of town. What's sort of the order of local politics that I should most familiarize myself if I want to have some influence, like starting from the most local level and then kind of moving across the city?
So quick note about Allendale. Allendale is interesting because most of Allendale is zoned for what's called single family 2. And that's even more restrictive than most of the other single family lots in the city. In Allendale, you're usually not even allowed to build a duplex or a garage apartment on any lot.
Oh, trust me, I'm dealing with that right now.
Oh, you are? Okay. So anyway, that's just a great example of a neighborhood that's increasingly expensive. And as a result, out of reach for a lot of working class and middle class. I mean, forget working class. No one, they can't get a house in Allendale, but even middle and upper middle class are increasingly challenged to find housing there. And we're not allowing different types of housing for different types of incomes, So in terms of, local politics, I'm entirely focused on city government, which I think is the most, I really think city government is the most interesting in that it's really shaping how the city grows and what the city is going to look like 10, 20, 50 years from now. These decisions we're making about the land development code, about transportation, that really, it can have a huge impact on the how the city looks and what it becomes. Of course, the school district is really important too. I don't really pay much attention to the school district. I have a almost 2-year-old though. But you obviously can't neglect the importance of schools in also shaping what a community looks like, and where we go. county
Is
government in Texas, you know, I, it's also it's important. I'd say but Travis County, I mean, their big focus is, I mean, they oversee basically the criminal justice system. Again, really important, but I don't know how it seems a little narrower than city government. I don't think that county government has quite as big an impact on all these different systems shaping our city.
you mentioned county government? I'm curious. Again, very ignorant to this, but is it the case that a county judge had quite a bit of influence during the sort of the shutdown part of COVID over some of the very local
Mm-hmm.
restrictions? Is that
Yeah.
how?
I mean, even currently, our newly elected county judge, Andy Brown, as well as his predecessor, Sam Bisco, they're taking a hard line on bars. They don't want to reopen bars. And yeah, the county judge is the highest elected official in Travis County. And it's interesting, I think partly because the name is so misleading, a lot of people are oblivious to the position and to its significance. But in Texas, basically the mayor of the county is called the county judge, and the county judge presides over the commissioner's court, which is the legislative body of the county. And whereas in Texas municipal government, every municipality determines its own system, right? Their city council, et cetera. But county government is the same in every county. And so there's a commissioner's court, and there's four commissioners and one county judge. And they hold partisan office, right? They run as Democrats or Republicans. And they have they don't have any land use authority, unlike the city. So they don't do anything on zoning. In Travis, well, the other thing is that in Travis County, essentially, city government basically deals with the city of Austin, and then the other cities, Pflugerville and Westlake and Maynard, they deal with their own cities, and county government is sort of left dealing with the unincorporated parts of Travis County, which is why, again, it's important stuff, but it's just the county government isn't having a big influence on the major metropolis and how it grows.
You mentioned earlier that the city council is a kind of a gridlock on land use development
Mm-hmm.
changes. You've written about the weak mayor, kind of strong mayor differential, and how that may play a part in these things. We're in a weak mayor system, correct? In Austin.
Yes.
Could you help us just kind of understand that a little bit, and how that varies and how that compares to a strong mayor system, and how
Mm-hmm.
that difference might play out in a situation like this?
So yeah, a strong mayor system is basically, and there are various types. There are various models. I mean, we're speaking in approximations here, but generally, a strong mayor system is similar to what we have at the federal government with the president, right? You have a mayor who is essentially the president and gets to put together an administration. He or she appoints the heads of departments, the transportation department, the police department, the fire department, and those people answer to the mayor. And the mayor fires and hires, and so those people are political appointees who answer to the mayor, and the mayor sort of has this influence over the city bureaucracy in the same way that the president sets up an administration that implements all kinds of policies, without Congress, right? And so, but under a weak mayor system, um, the mayor doesn't appoint a lot of that power over the bureaucracy is delegated to a city manager. And the city manager is hired by city council and essentially serves as the CEO of city government, right? And so city council is like the board of directors, and they hire a CEO, the city manager, who hires department directors. And so city staff is answering to the city manager. They're not really answering to city council or the mayor, and there are often limits, in the city of Austin, there's sort of supposed to be this city staff is supposed to be this sort of apolitical, nonpartisan staff who are answering to the city manager, who is this apolitical, nonpartisan bureaucrat, right? And city council and the mayor are not supposed to meddle with them and interfere with their work, although they give them direction. I mean, ultimately, again, it's like the board of directors. They can fire the city manager but for instance, they can't just say, we don't like the guy running transportation department, find a new person. Like, that's, of course you can put pressure on people behind the scenes. So anyway, typically throughout the US, most big cities have a strong mayor system. And it's generally smaller municipalities, often ones that where the mayor and city council aren't even full time, where they sort of rely on a manager who deals with the day-to-day administration. And so there's certainly a movement. As Austin has grown, there's been increasing calls to have a strong mayor system, because people think that's more appropriate for a big city. And there are arguments for and against. I mean, the argument for the strong mayor system is that you want the mayor has been elected by the people, and he or she has a mandate to design city government in the way that they've presented it to the voters, and they are going to, and so in that way, city government is more accountable to the voters. If we don't like the people running the fire department, the police department, we hold them accountable by our choice in mayor, whereas the city manager right now isn't directly accountable to the voters. But, there's the downside is that there certainly are benefits to having, this wall between the politicians and the professional staff. And there are certainly benefits to having, if you work at the transportation department, your boss isn't some political hack that the mayor picked. He's, hopefully someone who, is a professional or an expert and isn't thinking all the time about politics and about making the mayor happy,
Thanks for explaining that. That's really helpful. You did a nice job of laying that out. I want to finish with just a couple of really micro kind of practical questions for somebody like me who's concerned about land use in my area. I've got my city council member. Is that first of all, is that the most appropriate party to be communicating with if I want influence?
Yes.
Over something like that? Okay. And my second question on that would be, is an email, a letter, a phone call? I mean, are these things really useful at this level of politics? What can one do to try to make a case and possibly influence a city council member at the very micro level?
So yes, all of those things do have the capacity to influence your local officials. And I would add, in addition to, there's your city council member, but there's also another important part of city government in Austin are the citizen commissions and boards, right? A big part of it's a big part of Austin political tradition that you have these boards composed of volunteers, whether it's the Parks Board or the Public Safety Commission, or when it comes to land use, the Planning Commission. And every city council member will appoint somebody, usually somebody who kind of shares their philosophy on those issues. But these are volunteers who meet every 2 weeks and discuss these issues, and then make recommendations to city council. And city council does what they like with them, but traditionally it certainly has an influence over the process. And city council members rely on the commissions to inform their views on these issues. And so any land use issue will go through either the planning commission or the zoning and platting commission. There's not much difference between the two. It's a long story, but so if somebody was trying to get if your neighbor was trying to get their land rezoned for some reason, that would probably go to the planning commission, and you would get a note. Everybody in the neighborhood would get a notice, and you could go down to the planning commission and say, speak for or against that, and say, I don't want a garage apartment next door to me. Don't you dare do this. You're going to destroy my neighborhood. But so you can seek influence at those commissions. But speaking directly to your city council member can have a tremendous impact, because they usually don't hear from that many people. So the few people who do speak up can certainly have an influence. And if you can get 5 people along with you to say the same thing, that can also have a big impact. And this is both a great opportunity for normal people to influence the process. It can also be a big problem, in that I think that our really messed up land development code and our land use politics are a result of a vocal minority of people who really shape the process, right? It's a small group of older homeowners typically who make a lot of noise because they don't want any change in their neighborhoods. And the large majority of us just aren't paying attention. We're not going to show up to the planning commission and say, hey, no, I actually kind of think it'd be nice to have a restaurant down the street from me. I'm not against that. Let's do it.
Yeah. Last question is on speaking of influence. So that's sort of the grassroots style influence, but traditional influence is just voting. And when there's a big national presidential election, of course, there's tons of turnout. So local issues end up getting voted on. But in like an off-cycle election, the turnout's super duper low comparatively, right? For local issues. So just to help us put that in perspective a little bit about how much a vote can matter in these just purely local elections.
Well, I'll say that, you're right. There's a huge difference between presidential year turnout and off year turnout. And one of the big changes in city politics that in 2014, not only did we shift to a geographic system of city council instead of an at-large system, but we shifted from spring elections to November elections. And that made a huge difference because nobody votes in spring elections, right? Nobody under the age of 50 votes in spring elections. And so that has completely reshaped city politics. And that's the big difference between Prop A, which passed handily this year, and the 2 previous attempts to get rail passed, right? The previous attempt was in 2014, which was the lowest turnout election in like 70 years nationally. And so this year, there were so many young people voting that, a few days before the election, I talked to opponents of Prop A, and they conceded there was probably no way that they were going to defeat it because there were just too many young people voting. And so that's just a big, anyway. So I don't know exactly how to answer your question about what impact does a vote have locally. I don't.
Just on a relative basis, with such small turnout and off presidential cycles, it seems to me that one vote can make a bigger difference.
Sure. I don't think there have been any races that have literally been determined by one vote, but certainly the impact of each vote is much larger. And the impact of a campaign contribution or the impact of knocking on doors but as I wrote today in my newsletter, one thing that's happened because of the national politics has definitely trickled down to local politics. The old adage was all politics is local. And I think increasingly it's the opposite. It's all politics is national. Because national politics has become so polarized and people identify so strongly as members of a national political tribe they're making decisions in local politics based on, basically Trump versus Biden instead of, how you feel about local zoning.
Right. Jack, I really appreciate you doing this. Your insight's been really fascinating. I've learned a ton. Let's just close by telling people how they can find you, how they can find your work.
Yeah. Well, I've been helpful. Go to austinpolitics.net, austinpolitics.net, and I have a lot of my work up there that for free. But also, if you go to subscribe, you can sign up for the free 2-week trial period and to see if you like it. And you don't have to, you don't put in your credit card or anything until you've actually decided to pay. So it's not one of those deals. You get it for free. And if you do sign up, it's $10 a month or $100 a year. It newsletter comes every weekday. And I think if you're interested in learning more about what's going on locally, I think you'll find it pretty helpful.
I can vouch for that. It's a really, really fun resource for me to read. And I noticed that your archive is up there.
Yes.
So that's publicly available.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks again, Jack. It's been fun.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a good one.
Take care.
Appreciate it.